The week my family decided my brother deserved $12 million, my mother filled the good glass pitcher with ice water and set it in the middle of the table like a trophy. She never once wondered where the water came from. Nobody in that house ever did. They'd been drinking off my well for 12 years and calling it theirs. My name is on the water that keeps my brother's vineyard alive and has been for 12 years. The vines, the barrels, the pretty sign that says still water cellars, none of it grows a single grape without the well I drilled and the permit that, on paper, belongs to me. Nobody at that table knew it yet. The part that turned the whole night over was who'd been keeping the water running the entire time. I'll get to it. Stay with me. Welcome back to Suspense Calm Stories. I'm Ren, I'm 35, and I learned to find water for a living long before I found my own backbone. I built a groundwater company out of one dry ranch and a borrowed drill rig, and sold it for more than my family will ever forgive me for. This is the autumn they learned what quiet had really been paying for. If you've ever been the one holding everything up while everybody praised somebody else for standing, this story is for you. Drop a comment and subscribe. I drove out from Austin the Sunday before the harvest dinner, the way I had every year I could stand to. An hour and a half of hill country 2-lane, then the cattle guard rattling at the turn onto the family place outside Cypress Bend. The same windmill by the dry stock tank, its tail swinging loose because the brake never caught right and nobody but me ever climbed up to set it. My mother, Sylvia, was on the porch shelling pecans. "Ren," she said, not getting up, "fill the pitcher before your brother gets here. Use the good tap, not the hose." As if the kitchen and the hose didn't come up the same pipe, off the same well that ran because I paid the power bill on it. I filled it anyway. I always filled the pitcher. My father, Dale, came around from the barn and clapped me on the back like a part that had come in on time. There's my tough one. That was my name in this family. The tough one, the capable one, the one who could find water in a rock and never seemed to need any herself. You learn the math of a family young. My parents mortgaged the back pasture to start Garrett's vineyard, covered 2 years of his loans when the crop failed, paid off his repossessed truck at dawn so the neighbors wouldn't see. I learned all of it secondhand, told as warm family stories. My own hard seasons I weathered alone. At 18, I asked my mother to co-sign $300 for a room in town. She looked at me over her coffee and said the thing I'd hear in 100 shapes for the rest of my life. "You don't water the rocks, honey. You water the vine." She meant Garrett. She always meant Garrett. A son was the vine that carried a family forward, a daughter was rock, and you'd be a fool to waste good water on stone. So I learned to live on no water. That Sunday, filling a pitcher from a well that was mine, I almost believed it didn't touch me anymore. Then she asked, too sweet, how my little water business was doing. She'd never once asked before. And I understood the way you understand, whether coming over a ridge, that something was already moving. Here's how I got out, in case you think I just sat there and took it. I left at 18 with a license I'd paid for myself to drill and develop water wells, with the hydrology training stacked on later. I learned that water never lies about where it is. People lie. The ground keeps an honest record. My first real client was a rancher named Vera Castillo, 88 now. Back then, she had 90 acres of caliche, a quit windmill, a dry tank, and cattle that were suffering. 3 big outfits had taken her money and told her there was nothing down there. I found it 410 feet down, a seam in the limestone nobody else had bothered to chase. The day the water came up brown and then ran clear, Vera sat down in the dirt and cried, then looked up at me, 23, filthy, terrified I'd done the math wrong, and said the thing that rebuilt me. People will take you for free as long as you let them, Mija. Water's the same. You give it away, and they forget it ever cost a thing to find. She became the closest thing to a real mother I ever had. Family is mostly just who shows up when the well runs dry. The signature happened that same year. For the first time, I had something my family suddenly needed: a clean record, a contractor's license, and the one skill that could turn their dirt into money. Garrett wanted a vineyard on the family land, but the land was dry. Hill country dry. You can't grow wine grapes on faith and rain in central Texas. You need irrigation, and irrigation needs a high-volume well, and that well needed two things. Garrett didn't have a permit from the groundwater district, and a lender. The permit was the wall. The district had nearly stopped issuing new production permits. The aquifer was overdrawn, wells going dry all over the county. They'd only grant a big one to a qualified, licensed operator. Garrett wasn't licensed. I was, and the loan for the well and pump and miles of drip line, better than $200,000. No bank would write for Garrett alone, not with 2 repossessions and a vineyard that didn't exist yet. So my parents drove to Austin with a folder and a plan. "We just need your name on it," my mother said. "You're the one with the license. It protects the family." My father added the part that landed: "You'd be helping your brother build something real." I was 23, and I wanted, more than I can tell you, to be the daughter who gave instead of the rock nobody watered. So I signed. I went on the well loan as a co-borrower. I put $6,000 of my own savings into the pump when the gift money fell through. And I let them file the production permit, the legal right to pull that water from the ground, in my name, because the district required a licensed operator of record, and I was the only one we had. They said they'd move it all to Garrett in a year or 2. I believed them. The vineyard got a name, Stillwater Cellars, and my name stayed on the loan and the water for 12 years, on a place everyone in my family would swear they built for their son. I didn't carry that water for 12 years out of weakness. I tried to get free more times than I can count. As a co-borrower, I couldn't just walk away. The only way my name comes off is if Garrett refinances the whole loan into his own name, and to do that, he has to qualify a loan. He never could. His income swung with the harvest, his credit was a wreck, and the bank always said the same thing: the water was worse. I looked into transferring the permit to him, but the district had closed the basin. The aquifer was too far down. The permit I held was grandfathered. There was no replacing it, no buying another, no drilling a second well to escape the first. The only legal water that vineyard would ever have was mine. So when Garrett came up short, which was often, I quietly covered it: the pump bill, the district fees, a motor when it burned out in August. Because a default wouldn't just sink him, it would crater the credit I was building a company on. I logged every dollar in a field notebook in my truck: depth, flow, date, because you write down what you give so you don't lose track of yourself. Garrett never knew. My parents never knew. They were too busy telling the church how they'd built their son a winery to notice the water under it belonged to the daughter they swore had never needed a thing. While I quietly kept Stillwater alive, I was building my own thing, and nobody asked about it once. It started with Vera. Word got around the back roads that the young woman who found her water would answer her phone, chase a seam the big outfits wouldn't, tell a struggling family the truth about what was under their land. I hired one driller, then a crew. I named the company Deepfield. 12 years later, it was the firm that towns, ranchers, even the district called when the answer actually mattered. A national water services group came looking, the way they do when something small is run right. 4 months of lawyers, and I held the line on one term. Every person on my crew kept their job. The day it closed, Deepfield sold for $20 million. I sat in my truck in the parking garage and called Vera. Not my mother, Vera. Good, she said. Now, don't you let a soul make you feel small for finding what they couldn't. I told almost no one. I knew what would happen the day my people learned there was money, because I'd watched water do the same thing to dry ground. The first instinct of anyone who never dug is to grab yours. So I kept it close. I paid off my small house in Austin and set the rest aside. I even called the district one more time about getting the permit off my name. Basins closed. I called the bank about the loan. Garrett has to qualify. So I left it and told myself I'd deal with the vineyard in the new year. I almost made it. What I didn't account for was Shay. My brother's wife scrolls, and one evening she scrolled past a business article. Cypress Bend native sells Deepfield water in 8-figure deal. My face, small in the corner. She read it twice, then called my mother and read it out loud, slow, the way you lay down a winning hand. 20 million, the article guessed. Here's what I understood the second my phone started ringing more than it had all year. The family that hadn't truly seen me in 35 years had suddenly become very, very interested in me. If you've ever watched your family discover you, the moment they found out you were worth money, type "still holding" in the comments. You're not alone. Let's keep going. Mother called Tuesday, sweet as spring rain. We never see you, come out early. Garrett texted, which he never did. My father called to ask if my truck was running all right, his way of circling money without saying the word. By the second week, the calls stopped pretending. Your brother's in a hard stretch, my mother said. You know how a vineyard eats money. I knew better than she ever would. I'd been feeding it 12 years. He's proud, he won't ask. But you're in a position now. You don't need it, he does. There it was, the old creed aimed. You don't water the rocks, you water the vine. I didn't argue. I said I'd think about it, and I did something I'd never done in 35 years of being the tough one. I called a lawyer, not to fight them, but to learn exactly where I stood. Curtis Boyd kept an office over a feed store, and I figured anyone who works above the smell of seed corn can't be all bad. Water and ag law, 60-some, the calm of a man who'd watched families do their worst over dirt for 30 years. I laid it out, the loan, the 6,000, the 12 years, the permit. He listened without interrupting, then leaned back. Let me be sure I understand. You're not just on the hook for that loan. You're the permittee of record. On paper, Wren, the right to the only water that vineyard can use belongs to you. In this county, that's just about everything. He laid out the roads. I could sue Garrett, force the issue, make a great deal of noise, drag every hidden debt into daylight, and let him drown. It had a satisfying weight. But noise keeps you tied to that vineyard and to them for years, Curtis said. Think about what you actually want to walk away with. That night, I did what I do best. I charted. I pulled 12 years of records I'd filed without quite reading, pump bills, district statements, the loan history, the permit file. The well at 410 feet. The permit, my name on the operator line. The loan, refinanced twice. Each time, Garrett pulled cash out for a tasting room, a fancy press, leaning harder on equity my payments had protected. And each time only possible because a co-borrower's name was still on the paper. Mine. Then I totaled the notebook for the first time. $83,470. That was what I'd quietly poured into the ground to keep my brother's vineyard standing in a family where I'd paid my own room deposit out of tips at 18. I didn't cry. I looked at the permit and the number and understood I'd been telling myself the wrong story my whole life. The one where I was the taker. All along, the water had run the other way. $83,000 and one signature. And only one person in the family even knew they existed. Me. I called Curtis and told him to build the lawsuit, recover the money, force the sale, make them feel it coming. He warned me a suit would weld me to all of them for a year. Word got out the way it does in families. My mother called, rattled, demanding to know if I really meant to drag my brother to court. I didn't deny it. I'm not proud how good it felt to let them imagine it. Then one morning I caught myself in the shower rehearsing testimony, arguing with a Garrett who wasn't there, my jaw tight, the water gone cold. A lawsuit would keep me holding that vineyard up through every hearing, and I was so tired of carrying the water. So I drove out to Vera. 88 and sharper than people half her age, she listened with her hands folded. When I finished, she didn't tell me I was right. She asked a question. Ren, do you want to win or do you want to be free? I opened my mouth to say both. She lifted one finger. They're not the same. Winning keeps you in the field. Free means you walk out of it. You've been hauling water uphill for those people your whole life. Even your revenge is just another bucket. She set the cup down. Don't fight them for the water. Just stop carrying it and let the dry ground tell them the truth you've been too kind to say. Something turned over in me, quiet and final. If this has ever been your story, if you've been somebody's water and never once been thanked, do me one favor and subscribe to Suspense Calm Stories, because this next part is the part I wish someone had told me at 18. For 12 years, I'd been the only thing keeping that vineyard alive. The most powerful thing I could do was nothing. I just had to stop. I drove home, and somewhere on that 2-lane it clicked. I didn't need a courtroom or a raised voice. I just needed to stop being the water. For 12 years, the only reason Stillwater hadn't died was me, quietly paying the pump and curing the shortfalls so the loan never defaulted. If I stopped, the vineyard would come due on its own. The power would lapse. The pump would go quiet. The vines would do in one Texas summer what vines do without water, and the only way out for Garrett was the door I'd pointed at for a decade. Refinance into his own name, find his own water. He could do neither. The loan he couldn't qualify for, the water didn't exist. Without me, the math had one answer. The vineyard would be sold to pay off the note, and when it sold, my name would come off the loan, I'd relinquish the permit, and I'd be free. Not through a fight, through subtraction. The revenge they'd never see coming wasn't an attack. It was an absence. You don't make it rain to prove a point. You stop pumping what was never going to recharge, and you let the land find its own level. I called Curtis and said I'd changed direction. No lawsuit, so I did 2 simple, lawful things. I stopped covering the shortfalls that day. No more quiet checks, no more pump bill. And I sent the loan servicer and the district written notice that I'd no longer cure payments or subsidize operations, and formally requested the figures to release my interest and relinquish the permit. Curtis said I was within my rights on every word. I signed it, Wren Mercer, the same name from the permit, 12 years older, and mailed it 3 weeks before the harvest dinner. Notice when this happened. The real turn didn't happen at any table. It happened in a quiet post office on a Wednesday with nobody watching. By the time I drove to Cypress Bend, it was done. The water was already stopping. The vines were already thirsty. They just couldn't feel it yet. If you've ever sent one quiet letter or call that changed your life without raising your voice, type DRY well in the comments. Let's keep going. Early supper was the Sunday I told you about: the pecans, the good pitcher, the windmill swinging loose. They were all there. My mother, tight and righteous. My father, who wouldn't meet my eyes. Garrett, working the room in a vest with the vineyard's logo on it. Shay, watching me the way you watch whether you started. Halfway through the meal, she set down her fork, smiled that bright, terrible smile, and set it for the room. So are we not going to talk about Wren's $20 million? So I told them plainly. I'd built a company, sold it, it was a good number. Short and unbothered, the way Vera taught me. My mother's shock lasted 4 seconds before it turned into the thing I'd seen my whole life: calculation. She put her hand over mine, warm and damp. Sweetheart, that's a blessing for this family. This family, not me. Then, softer, the old law. And your brother's struggling so. You don't need it. He does. It moved fast. Garrett leaned in. I'd never ask, he said, asking, but the vineyard's tight if you floated me something. He named a figure, then a bigger one. By the end of the meal, floated me had become your fair share to give. Shay delivered the rehearsed line. After everything your parents did for you, you'd let your own brother lose the vineyard. Everything they did for me fit in a coffee cup, but I didn't say it. Let me think about it, I said. Before I left, my father followed me to the porch. The windmill banged in the dark. Your mother shouldn't push like that, he said quietly, the closest thing to my side I'd heard in 35 years. I know it hasn't been even. Something in my chest loosened against my will. For 1 second, I thought he might apologize. Then he sighed and ruined it. But you always land on your feet, Wren. You're like your granddad. You can find water anywhere. Garrett can't. We had to put everything into the one who couldn't make it on his own. The same arithmetic in a sadder voice. He confessed he'd pulled the equity out of the home place years ago to keep Garrett afloat, that their retirement was thin, that he was scared. And I felt for him. But fear isn't a deed to my life. I'm sorry you're scared, Dad, I said, and I meant it. But you bet the whole place on the son who couldn't carry water, and you never once thanked the daughter who found it. I drove back to Austin in the dark. He didn't ask what I meant. The letter did its quiet work while the family planned how to spend my money. The pump power lapsed. The payment came up short the way it always did, but this time no check appeared from Austin. And for the first time in 12 years, the shortfall just sat there, and the account ticked into delinquency. Out at Stillwater, the drip lines went dry in the worst week of a Texas September. Vines don't argue. They just start to turn. Garrett got the notices that week. Past due. Action required. He'd never seen one because I'd spent 12 years making sure he didn't have to. He called our parents in a panic instead of me, because in his mind, I was the one with money now, not the one who'd been holding his whole operation up. My mother called, frantic, saying the loan was somehow behind and the bank must have made a mistake. I let it go to voicemail. There was no mistake. There was just, for the first time, the truth arriving on its own schedule. Garrett finally called me himself the night before the dinner, shouting before I said hello. The vineyard was behind. The well wasn't pumping. Did I know anything about this? because the timing was awfully convenient, right after everyone found out about my money. I let him run out of steam. Then I said the calmest thing I've ever said to my brother. Garrett, refinance the loan into your own name, like I've asked for 12 years. And get your own water permit while you're at it. Silence. Then the smaller voice under the shouting. I can't. They told me I don't qualify, and the district says the basin's closed. There's no permit to get. The first true thing he'd said to me in years. I know, I said gently. You never could. That's why my name's been on both since you were 25. I could hear him trying to do math he'd never had to do. Your name on my water, on our loan, and the permit is mine. It always was. I put $6,000 into that pump and covered your shortfalls for 12 years. 83,000 of them. A long pause. Then why did it stop? He whispered. Because I stopped, I said. That's all. I just stopped. See you at dinner. And I hung up. The harvest dinner was the next Saturday, and I arrived at 6 exactly. The place smelled the way it always did, cedar smoke, my mother's brisket, the dust of a dry year. The good pitcher sweated in the middle of the table, full of ice water off my well. 6 places. Garrett at the head. My chair by the screen door that never latched. Some things a family won't change, even as the ground goes dry under it. They were all there, plus 2 aunts briefed into their disapproval. Garrett looked gray, like a man who hadn't slept, which he hadn't. I sat in my chair by the door and folded my hands. I learned long ago, sitting with frightened ranchers waiting on a well that might come in dry, that you don't fill a silence to make yourself comfortable. You let it work. Garrett didn't make it through the blessing. He set down his fork, eyes already wet. I'm going to lose the vineyard, he said, voice cracking. The well's dead. The bank's sending letters. Everything Mom and Dad built for me, and you're sitting on 20 million and you won't lift a finger. You could fix this with one phone call. I kept my hands folded. How much do you think would fix it, Garrett? He named it before he could stop himself. 12 million. The table went still. Even the aunts looked startled. 2 weeks ago, he'd wanted a loan. Now, panicked, he'd jumped to 12 of my 20, as if my whole life's work were a pot we were all meant to split. Then my brother, 37 years old, slid out of the chair at the head of the table and went down onto our mother's floor on his knees. Please, you're my sister. Don't let them take everything. And my mother turned the full force of 35 years on me. She stood up so fast her chair scraped. Look what you're doing to him, she screamed. You walked in here with your money and stole his future. You're a thief, Wren. My brother wept on the floor. My mother called me a thief. Every face turned to watch me crumble the way I always had. I didn't. I felt, of all things, a kind of peace, because I was the only person in that room who knew what was true. I didn't raise my voice. The quieter you get, the harder a room has to lean to hear you. I want to say one thing, and then I'm going to finish my supper and go home. That vineyard has run on one well for 12 years. I drilled it. I found the water 3 companies swore wasn't there. The loan that paid for it has had 2 names on it since Garrett was 25, his and mine, because no bank would lend to him alone. I'm not a co-signer. I'm a co-borrower. And the permit, the legal right to pull a single drop of that water, is in my name. Only my name. The whole time. My father's head came up slowly. And for 12 years, every time the vineyard came up short, I quietly covered it. $83,000 all told. None of you knew. That's the only reason a single grape ever grew out there. Last week, I stopped. That's all. I didn't sue anyone. I didn't take a dollar from any of you. I stopped paying for water that was never mine to carry. The only way the vineyard lives now is if Garrett refinances into his own name and finds his own water, and we all know he can do neither. I looked at my brother on the floor. You didn't lose your future, Garrett. You've been drinking mine since you were 25. I just stopped pouring. My mother found her voice, thin and shaking. Family money comes home to family. You're right. And for the first time all night, I let myself smile, small and tired. It's finally coming home. To me. Under the table, my father exhaled, long and low, like a man who'd known the truth for 12 years and had only just been made to hear it out loud. Then he looked at my mother and said, quiet but clear, Sylvia. I always knew whose water it was. She turned on him like he'd slapped her. He didn't take it back. She got louder. After everything we sacrificed, we could only ever water the vine. I set down my fork and gave her the last thing I had to say, gently, because it wasn't an attack anymore. You always said you don't water the rocks, Mom. You water the vine. You were right. But you spent 35 years so busy watering Garrett, you never once asked where the water came from. She stopped. It came from the rock. It always did. I stood up. The chair scraped back. Outside, the windmill banged in the wind, that old loose sound, the one I'd climbed up to set right 100 times because nobody else ever would. I wasn't going to climb up tonight. I put on my jacket. My mother was still talking, the words getting smaller, the way a storm sounds once you've driven past it. I'm not angry at you, I said from the door, and it surprised me to find it was true. I'm not going to fight you. I'm not going to sue. I've spent my whole life hauling water uphill for this family, and I'm finally setting the bucket down. I looked at Garrett. I hope you figure out the vineyard, but I won't be the one who figures it out for you, not anymore. I looked at my parents. Don't call me about money. I won't answer. If you ever want to call me about anything that isn't a number, I'll pick up. The choice is yours. It always was. Then I opened the screen door. The wind caught it, and the broken latch banged against the frame the way it had my whole life. For 35 years, I'd been the one who turned back to ease it shut. I let it swing. I didn't reach back, and for the first time in my life, the latch was somebody else's problem. Here's how it landed. Garrett couldn't refinance, and there was no water to be found anywhere the law would let him reach. The servicer did what servicers do, sent the notices, gave him a window, waited out the timeline. He couldn't cure it, and no quiet check was coming. By the next spring, the vineyard went up for sale to pay off the loan. It sold to a family who turned the dry rose back into pasture and put cattle on it, which I liked, because at least the land would do something honest again. When the loan paid off at closing, my name came off the note, and the district let me relinquish the permit. 12 years, gone with a few signatures. I was free. My father's retirement was thinner than my mother ever understood, and they downsized quietly. Shay left Garrett inside a year. Her loyalty had been to a vineyard and a logo, and once those were gone, so was she. Garrett leases a little place now and works another man's land, and I hear he's learning the arithmetic the rest of us learned long ago. I didn't celebrate any of it. There's no triumph in watching a family come apart along the seams they stitched themselves. But I slept. God, I slept. I took part of the money and did one thing that mattered. All over that county, there are families whose household wells went dry while the big vineyards pumped, families like Vera was, like I'd have been. So I started a fund that drills them clean wells for free and named it for Vera Castillo. She came to the first one in a wheelchair, 90 and fierce. And when the water came up brown and then ran clear, she gripped my hand and said, "There, that's water coming home." We laughed until we cried. I learned something out there I wish I'd known at 18. in that drafty chair by the door. You can love people with your whole heart and still refuse to be their water table. You can be the deepest well in the county and still keep some of yourself. And the day you stop pouring for people happy to let you run dry, you find the thing they never wanted you to know, that you were never the one who needed holding up. Water finds its own level. So do you. You just have to stop carrying it uphill. That's how one quiet daughter took her water back. There's a card framed on my office wall now, in my grandfather's hand. The man who taught me to find water before I could drive. It says, "Water keeps no secrets. It goes where it's pulled, and sooner or later it tells on everybody." He was right. If you've ever been the well a family forgot to thank, hear me. You're allowed to stop pouring and watch what finally learns to find its own water. Tell me in the comments about the day you set the bucket down. Share this with someone still carrying water uphill for people who never said thank you. And subscribe to Suspense Calm Stories. Your boundary is next.